sorry for the rearrangement of the place to be, but water and gravity do things to places that you don't expect. So
Richard is a survivor and a benefactor and experienced all of that. So if you will, please give Richard Venable a big round of applause.
Okay, I'll turn this one on, and then it'll probably turn that one on.
It's off.
Okay. Can you hear me through speakers?
Yeah.
Well, Ken did an excellent job of recounting my career. I got to Kingsport as quick as I could in 1972. I grew up in Gate City boy with sidewalks. My grandpa Sullivan had a farm, and there was, I just spent a couple of weeks there. But it's a pleasure to be here. Before I start, I would like to ask those in the room, I know Lowry and Pat, and several of you that worked for Mason-Dixon as regular employees. If you worked for Mason-Dixon back in the day, would you raise your hand? Okay,
my dad did.
Okay, that's close enough. We've got a lot. We've got a lot. Ken said I've outlived most of my peers. By the way, I'm 79 years old. I'm gaining on Lowry Doggett every day. We're happy to have Lowry here. And, I have followed him. I followed him to Mason-Dixon. I followed him to Blum. And followed him here today. So it's a pleasure for me to be here. I think I maybe have 30 minutes. I've got about 40 slides that you'll see. I want to direct your attention to the slides and don't look at me because it makes me nervous. I have stressed over this ever since Ken called me 6 months ago. And so if you'll help me get through it, and we'll have time for questions if you have some questions. My partner in this is John Osborne, and John's sitting in the back here. And after we're through, when we have questions, he'll bring the microphone around. And John is responsible for this PowerPoint. If you don't remember, John was a columnist for the Kingsport Times-News for many years. I don't remember having met John. But he is the real Mason-Dixon historian because he did research on a series he did on Mason-Dixon some time ago. So I was fortunate enough to talk to him into coming to work for the county. And when Ken called me, I said, aha! And I told Ken, he said, that's a pretty good move. So anyway, our first slide here, you see the 50th anniversary straight truck. And that's Jack King and our Director of Maintenance, Joe Harvey, with him. I don't know who's in the truck, but that was taken in 1982. The company started in 1932. So that was a great celebration for all of us that were there. And you'll see some memorabilia on the back table. Most of that's mine. The articles are John. And if you have an opportunity to go back there and look at that, a lot of it's related to that 50th anniversary. And in talking about Mason-Dixon, I'm sorry I'll have to talk about me too. And I don't really want to do that. I'll give you as much history as I can of Mason-Dixon. But having worked there 16 years, and I don't mind telling you, Ken mentioned that I was working at HDC for a while. I was an apprentice electrician there. And I found myself in a building one morning. Actually, one afternoon, they were insulating pipes, and there was a cloud of asbestos smoke from cutting those pipes. And I walked downstairs and picked up the phone in one of those buildings and called my wife, who was secretary to the director of personnel at Mason-Dixon. I said, do you think Mr. Warren would give me a job? Ray Warren. And she said, I don't know, but I'll ask him. Next day, I applied to Mason-Dixon, and I think the next day, I accepted an entry-level job at $2.01 an hour. I had to take a 36 cent an hour pay cut to go to Mason-Dixon. But anyway, that changed my life. Changed my life greatly. And my wife had been there for 2 years, Dole Burdine, no miles. Dole had hired her straight out of high school 2 years prior to that. I worked at Mason-Dixon until 1984, just right before Christmas in '83. Mason-Dixon announced that they were selling the company to Central Truck Lines in Warren, Michigan. A lot of lives changed that day. But those of us in the corporate office understood why those lives changed, and I'll try to tell you a little bit about my information on that. Some of it's urban legend, and a lot of the things I say today will be urban legend. A lot of it will be facts, and I'll back it up by slides. City with no student loans at that time, I couldn't go to college directly out of high school, as a lot of us couldn't. And so they made it possible for me to go back to college and to learn the things I needed to do to be a productive employee. And that was the story of Mason Dixon. They took folks like me, indigenous folks in this area. But beyond that, they also were prodigious in hiring transportation graduates from School of Transportation at the University of Tennessee. And we had a lot of homegrown first generation folks that started out with Mr. E. Ward, and I was actually in third generation management of Mason Dixon. We've been through two additional people, two additional generations, and I have pictures of those folks, and I think you'll recognize some of them. Mason Dixon was a Kingsport-based trucking company and a true American success story for more than half of the 20th century. In its infancy, it operated out of a family home and had 3 trucks. At its peak, it was the largest family-owned trucking company in the nation, number 14 in the total list of trucking companies in the nation, the largest family-owned with over 4,000 people and dozens. I believe the last count I have is 56 terminals in the eastern United States with revenues over $200 million. Quote from Mr. King, what could be better than to establish an agency to supply this service? And he started this company with Roy B. Moore, and some of you all might have known Roy B. Moore, and you might have known Dan, or his son. Dan was a little more my generation. Yeah, okay. Thank you, John. That's why he gets the big bucks. Okay.
How you go forward?
How far I'm pushing the back road. That's innovation. Going on, what's in the name? According to an article celebrating the company's 25th anniversary in 1957, E. Ward's mother, Margaret, named the trucking lines. It was noted that the elder Mrs. King had, in her early childhood, witnessed the strife between the North and the South. And therefore, at the kitchen table, she had suggested the name Mason Dixon, the Mason Dixon line, which runs through Maryland, separates the North and South. Company records in the King family memories credit the Mason Dixon line trademark the logo of Civil War. Robbins, Grant, and Lee shaking hands with from a commercial artist in Knoxville. It's said to have been adapted from an original painting on display in, would you believe, the Brooklyn Museum of Arts in New York. This new trucking line will run north and south and forever join those two sections in friendly commerce and industry. And that is a quote attributed to Margaret Magazine, E. Ward's mother. Some of you will recognize the old logo that started out with Mason Dixon. We have some more pictures of that. Grant and Lee, now joining the North and South, became a fixture on the East Coast in the trucking industry. By the end of 1933, the company had accumulated a net worth of $9,986. In January 1934, incorporated procedures were initiated. By year's end, E. Ward had bought out his partner, Mr. Steele, and Roy B. Moore, and was the sole owner of Mason Dixon. In 1934, they had a building on Clay Street in downtown Kingsport, and they became the operations center. That's very close by here. How we look when we begin? That's old number 2. That's the Mason Dixon Service Department, and one of the first trucks that E. Ward bought was for his historic trip to New York to recruit business. Along with other carriers across the nation, Mason-Dixon come under control of the Motor Carrier Act passed by the U.S. Congress. Mason-Dixon, when that was passed, was allowed to keep its initial routes of service, mainly from Atlanta to New York. These are in days when regulations started to become very strong, and the Motor Carrier Act passed by Congress established the Interstate Commerce Commission. And you had to be granted rights by the Interstate Commerce Commission to carry freight over certain roads. They weren't just routes, they were roads. I've always noted that when I came to work with Mason-Dixon, we could not deliver freight south of Interstate 40 or US Highway 70 through Tennessee. We had to take it to Cookville and give it to another carrier, Averitt Lines, which you see today, headquartered in Cookville, delivered our freight that was south of Interstate 40. By the end of 1938, Mason-Dixon had over 400 employees. Think about that. In 1938, the depth of the Depression, and $61,000 in revenue. Nearly $1.3 million today. In the 40s, World War II took a lot of the personnel from Mason-Dixon because of the scarcity of equipment and replacement parts. The graveyard, the old trucks, was the main source of maintaining the trucks that were on the road. In 1945, the general maintenance shop of Mason-Dixon, which was key to keeping those trucks on the road, was destroyed by fire, quoted by Jack King. New maintenance facilities were built on an 11-acre tract on Eastman Road. A new terminal in front of that maintenance facility was built in the same location. In 1946, the general office was built there. That's an aerial picture of Eastman Road. I believe the golf course was beside the Mason-Dixon lines in 1946 and 47, 48. You'll see near Eastman Road is the corporate office building. Directly behind it was the freight boat terminal. And directly at the end of the lot was called barn. We kept all company records in the barn, plus Jack's.
Can you work on your mic to make it a little louder?
Make
We're
it
having trouble
louder.
hearing.
I'm not sure again, but I'll take it off and hold it. That might help. Would that help? Okay.
Way better.
But anyway, the barn kept all of our records. Plus, I think in 1930, some Packard that Jack King had collected over the years and kept that in the barn. But those are two pictures of Green Acres, as you see, in Brooks Circle to the left of Mason-Dixon. And at the end of Mason-Dixon is where Food City sits today. So they grew with Kingsport in the late 40s. With the new maintenance, terminal, and general office built, a massive fleet replacement program began. They'd worn out the trucks during the war. And by the end, by 1949, the entire fleet had been replaced and was new and modern. 1948 was a record-breaking year for Mason-Dixon with nearly 1,000 employees and $2.6 million in revenue, $33 million today. That's a lot of growth. And earnings finally of over $450,000. And the company's net worth has risen to $665,000. There is the corporate office on Eastman Road with one of the early Mack trucks, another picture of corporate office. In 1957, the company celebrated 25 years, 25th anniversary. A 12-page section in the Kingsport Times-News was dedicated to that celebration. And part of those articles are on the back table over there. They're difficult to read, but they are online. They are in the Kingsport archives. E. Ward's sons assumed corporate management. E. Williams became president, and John R. King became executive vice president and general manager in 1957. There is a route map of where Mason-Dixon serves. Between those major points, the furthest we went was West Piston, Pennsylvania. That's where the Great Pennsylvania Flood near Johnstown happened, and went all the way to Atlanta, Georgia, and west to Nashville. We also had High Point and Greensboro at that point. But that was authority granted east-west carrier, or an east to south carrier. That's the 20th anniversary truck in 1952. In 1958, the only way you could grow at that time under regulation was to buy another company or buy a portion of their routes. We bought Robinson tank lines. Up to that point, Mason-Dixon had been dry freight, a trailer like you see sitting on the table back there. They were about 42, 43 foot then. They also bought Robinson and expanded into the tank line service. You tell me, checked a lot of them in at Eastman, and Eastman was our major customer at that time. And that became the impetus for Mason-Dixon Tank Line, which was a separate corporation. In June 1960, we negotiated purchase of Silver Fleet. That's when Mason-Dixon really took off. It's an Indiana-based carrier, and it got us to Chicago and the Midwest. From there to Birmingham, Alabama. See, Mason-Dixon expanded signs to buy a Silver Fleet system. We bought the whole system and converted it to Mason-Dixon lines. There's a route map after we bought Silver Fleet. You can see the faint lines of the Silver Fleet purchase getting us into Chicago and Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Indianapolis, and down to Birmingham. That is one of the Silver Fleet trucks that we purchased the entire company. And as you can see, it was not as modern as Mason-Dixon was, but it didn't take long to bring it up. 1962, with great vision, the King family purchased 85 acres of land on Highway 11W for a new terminal, shop facilities, and the future location of the general office. In 1963, the Tri-City Terminal Maintenance and Transportation buildings were opened. And that's what you remember of being this huge truck terminal out there. The maintenance building was also huge. We had not moved to the corporate office there yet. Maintenance and transportation were on 11W, pretending the future. And that is the maintenance building. As you can see, every time a tractor came in off the road and lined them up, took them to the maintenance, did preventative maintenance on them. That was headed up by Joe Harvey. Frank Eaton early on, and Joe Harvey later on was in charge of maintenance at Mason-Dixon. Terminal facilities were also completed in Cincinnati, Baltimore, and Asheville. Most importantly, the Interstate Commerce Commission granted approval of the Silver Fleet. You had to wait on them to approve that in the best interest of the American public. And that was always the guiding principle, is whether Mason, being at that point in time, part of the word monopoly established by the Interstate Commerce Commission. You could only be in the business if you had the authority granted by them. So therefore, that authority became extremely valuable. One of the bigger assets on the books. And the only way you could get it was buy. Or if you found an area that was not being served, you could go plead before the Interstate Commerce Commission to grant you that authority. To give you an example of how it was regulated, way back when we, in the 30s and 40s, certain communities in Tennessee, and East Tennessee particularly, didn't have service of motor carriers. Sneeville, Tennessee, and Hancock County. Anybody ever been over Route 66? Couldn't get a tractor trailer in there. Well, we were innovative. We had a responsibility. Not only did you have the authority, you had the responsibility to serve that community. So instead of sending probably a 55, 60 foot truck up State Route 66 to Hancock County in Sneeville, our terminal manager in Morristown contracted with a local milk company. And the milk company delivered our freight. As they went around picking up milk in Hancock County every day, they would deliver our freight to Sneeville. Wasn't on the up and up, but we did service it as we were required to. January '69, the company acquired Yankee Lines, last major purchase. Yankee Line was headquartered in Akron, Ohio, and that gave us Akron, Cleveland, and the heavily industrial rich Ohio Valley. And that is the Special Commodities Division. Special Commodities Division was a pure truckload division. That's what serves this country mostly today, is the that was the forerunner in 1969 of how we deliver our freight today, which is in triplet quantities. Mason-Dixon Information Exchange. Lowry, you remember that? Lowry was the daddy of that. And there is a booklet, a training booklet, put together by Lowry and in my rate department on training people to use the Matic system. It was the first, I think it was probably the first computerized communication network in the country. Matic provided direct type written communications between headquarters in Kingsport and every Mason-Dixon terminal in the nation. And that ended up being 60 terminals. In 1974, Matic grew into a full information system, providing computer-assisted dispatch, automatic tracing, and freight bill transmission. And I'll go away from that for just a little while, and Larry will remember this. Mason-Dixon produced anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 freight bills per day. And it was an 8-part freight bill. So if you had 6,000, that means you had 48,000 pieces of paper that were used to track freight, bill the customer, bill files. But anyway, in each terminal we had an IBM typewriter that had 8 carbons in it. And we had a specially manufactured 8-part bill. And you push those carbons through the bill and get it into the typewriter and actually type the freight bill. You type from and to is what it was and how much it weighed. Matic revolutionized that. I'll have a picture of our rating department here. We centralized our rating. I was responsible for a portion of that rating department. I traveled all over the country at that time working with freight clerks. And one important thing is, back during that time of total regulation, there was only one correct rate on one shipment out of millions. And you had to find it and put it on a bill and bill the customer for it. And that was what my rate department did. They found that rate. Moving on, and I hope you will look at that Matic training manual back there for you. In 1971, Mason-Dixon purchased AOK trucking and got its mobile in Montgomery. I remember being in those terminals myself in 1971 as we brought them online. And I know if Lowry wasn't there, he had people there because we had to install those Matic machines to make them part of the most advanced communication system in the nation. Let me stop here. Mason-Dixon led the industry in nearly every phase. The key required excellence, and the people that they hired bought into that culture every day. If you were part of the Mason-Dixon management team, you were expected to be a leader, and our people were. And the ATA, you were a member of the American Trucking Association. In every association where we participated, we were expected to be in leadership. It was never written down. It was never said. You just said, I'm with Mason-Dixon. I'm going to be the leader of this organization. And in my field, I did that in the Washington-based National Motor Carrier Weighting and Research Bureau. I was a member for 3 years, and in my 4th year, I was chairman of it as a nationwide organization. You wouldn't believe, I'll digress from the scripture a little bit, you wouldn't believe that people would cheat you. And part of my job was to make sure our customers stayed straight. We charged for a shipment, where it was going to, where it was from, where it was going to, the mileage, what it was, and how much it weighed. And I established an entire department, along with Ed Curley, who led the industry in this, that perused all 4,000 shipments. We never got them all, but we had people at every terminal looking for that. And I think around 1974, 75, we picked up $1 million of extra money because the shipper would say, oh, this weighs 1,000 pounds and it actually weighed 1,500 pounds. And we enlisted our dock workers, our Teamster dock workers, to help us with that. And we said, you think a shipment's missed weight and they didn't put enough weight on it, you weigh it and we'll pay you 10% how much we pick up. So our Kingsport folks who work docks helped us make $1 million that year. And we would expect shipments. Rough iron castings are not worth much. And somebody steals them or you lose them or whatever, you don't have to pay a big fine. People would describe the work of rough iron casting machine parts, which were valuable and could be extremely valuable, as that to get a lower rate. So we opened boxes. And as I say, we picked up $1 million around 74, 75. That's the rate department that Lowry Doggett helped set up. I was a supervisor in that department for the rate clerks. And every night, instead of having 60 building clerks and rate clerks and 60 terminals from Boston to Atlanta to Mobile, we had this group of people rating those bills off the system designed by our management information systems. And I meant there's only one rated. At the end of that room, you'll see what we call the tariffs, and that contained that one rate. And you had to have people skilled in finding that one rate, and it was not an easily acquirable skill. It took years of training. But it did make sure that Mason-Dixon got the right revenue for the rate they were on. New headquarters, big built near the terminal on Eastman Drive, was announced in '71. Mason-Dixon opened the new two-story building in January of 1973, and folks, it was first class. That last picture I showed you, my rate department, which is on the back quarter of the second floor. It was ahead of its time in technology and style. However, I believe we had management information system data processing took 1/2 of the first floor at Mason-Dixon for its management. And it said 1/4 was occupied by the mainframe computer, the rest of it was occupied by cartridge and things of that nature, and Lowry's office. That's a picture of the building. It's very sad that that building is not there anymore. It would have lasted 100 years, but it fell into disrepair when Central got it. Central moved the headquarters from Mason-Dixon to Warren, Michigan, where Central Truck Line was. Central Truck Line was owned by Matty Maroon. It was a wholly owned family business at that time, one of the largest ones. Matty Maroon was the brother-in-law of Jimmy Hoffa. I'll hold this up a little louder. His brother-in-law was Jimmy Hoffa. But Matty Maroon's business was buying carriers and breaking the union. And that's the first thing happened when they bought Mason-Dixon and Kingsport. And I believe it was 1984. Mason-Dixon went on strike, and that was the end of Mason-Dixon and Kingsport. When Matty Maroon said, we won't operate as a union carrier anymore. Mason-Dixon. Several people from Kingsport moved to Warren, Michigan, and finished their career there. And they did well. They were, I think, a cut above employees that Central had. That is a picture of the interior of the new office building. The stairs going up, and Mallory probably recognize that young lady coming down the stairs. That happened to be my wife for 57 years. And she was the secretary to George Maiden. Some of you probably may have known George and Jewel Maiden. Lived here in Kingsport for many years. George was from Glade Springs. Funny story, Jewel was an Atlanta debutante, a true Southern lady. And when they were married in Atlanta, George was Emory and Henry University, Emory and Henry College at that time. And the wedding announcement said she's marrying George A. Maiden, a graduate of Emory University and Henry College. so they empowered him to graduate from Emory University in Atlanta and Henry College up in Glade Springs. But that picture is in one of our books over here. Mason-Dixon in the middle 70s hired a PR firm, and they produced some of the books on the table back there. Long hair was in style then, and that was me and Christine Wiseman. And that shows you the Mason-Dixon operating routes during that time. And she has circled Atlanta, which was one of our bigger terminals on 285 minutes around Atlanta. tank lines we talked about before, that was run by Jack King. And later Robin, the son, third generation, was president of the Mason-Dixon tank lines. There's one of the Mack trucks. Mason-Dixon used many trucks over the years. Peterbilt, Mack, White, different trucks. And that they used to call that the Sideliner because it did not have a passenger seat in it. And that is the new style trailer with the new logo that was designed by Art Lavish in the mid-70s. Went away from the old picture type Lynn Grant to the more modern oval. Mason-Dixon was always the leader in the National Truck Rodeo. Always. The fellow that ended up running my company when I started was always the national champion, Bill Rhodes, because it was a rodeo for truck drivers. And you go, Mason-Dixon sponsored our drivers. And that's just a few of the trophies that they won over the years. But they were absolutely the best, most professional drivers in the country. I'm proud of this one. Believe me, don't know what we had there. That, I believe, is out of Crown Colonies, which was a later creation of Crown Enterprises that E-Board had incorporated back early on. Then Jack King, John R. King, president of Mason-Dixon. E-Board retired, I believe, in around in the middle 70s. E. William became the chairman of the board, and Jack became the president of Mason-Dixon Lines. There's William, the chairman of the board and treasurer. And that's pretty much our full-blown routes. After starting in 1932, in 1982, that is the Mason-Dixon service area. And we were, I think, over my career, I don't know that there's a single terminal there that I wasn't in, because I had people working in all those terminals, as I said before, rating bills, and we brought it to Kingsport and reduced the cost by probably 80%. There's the back page of a publication with Jack and Bill and Don Good. I know some of you all know Don Good. Ralph Baldock in the lower left and Charlie Hartstein. And that was George Maiden on the bottom right. I noticed in the paper this morning the death of Bill Keith. You all probably don't know Bill, but Bill was born in 1940, was a graduate of the University of Tennessee, and obviously he was good because they went and hired him. He was the nephew of Mr. Baldock. But Bill, as with a lot of folks that graduated from Mason-Dixon, either through their own choice or being asked to leave or staying to the end, started their own companies. Bill started First Fleet in Nashville. And as I say, he passed away this week with a greatly successful company called First Fleet. If you watch the trucks on the road, it has a little Mason-Dixon appearance. JB, I'll get his name, but he was a Sullivan for Mason-Dixon in Nashville, which is the hotbed of trucking. JB bought volunteer truck lines from Governor David Warner when I was in the General Assembly. And I used to walk down the hall with Ned, and I'd say, Ned, how's JB doing with volunteer? And is he making any money? Because I was in the trucking business then too. He said he'll make some money as soon as he gets me paid off. That was Ned. But he was a benefactor. But I guess the point is, Mason-Dixon trained a lot of people in this industry, and they went on to be greatly successful. J.B. Baker is who bought Volunteer, and Volunteer is a huge company today. Ned had never grown it that much. There's Don Penland on the left, Bobby Ultraman. That's some of you may know Bobby, and Charlie Hartstein. Dick Payton. Dick Payton ended up as the president of Mason-Dixon in his later years. And Bob Scott, who was always a vice president and district director. And Dick Payton's nephew, Sean, was the coach of the New Orleans Latter-day Saints. A lot of folks don't know that, but Sean spent time in Kingsport with his Uncle Jack. There's another picture of that 50th anniversary straight truck. The old fleet along the way. It's a city pickup truck. Use the smaller trucks for delivery in the city and easier to maneuver. Some of the older fleet. That is the fleet that was the major fleet replacement after the war. Fortunately, the government stood in to make sure that trucking companies could operate during the war. It's the only way we had to transport goods. That's not old number 2, but it looks like the trailer that he used. The early 70s, the Mason Dixon 52 terminals across the United States and 18,000 miles of authority. 75 miles of those granted by the regulatory group. The company's freight, tanker, and special commodities division provides service to 48 states. Another Mack truck. Mack truck was located in Allentown, Pennsylvania. It just so happened we had a terminal right down the road from Mack truck. Visited many times. There was a cab opener. Most of them you see, most of the Mason Dixon trucks have the long hood. That's where the driver is actually sitting on the engine. Again, route map, Mason Dixon truck. And so, again, I don't know how long you wanted me to go, but I've got time for questions.
Let's have questions.
I have 2 hearing aids, so I'm going to ask John to circulate among you. And we don't know that we can get them both operating at the same time, but if we can't get that microphone operating, he can tell me what your question is. So if I don't know the answer, I'll make something up.
The Kings that are starting Mason Dixon, are they the same family that started the boatyard, hauling salt all over the country?
I don't believe so. I think he was born in Smartsville. He grew up on the campus of Eastman. I don't think it was the same. Maybe a generation back, but no.
We can't hear you.
You can't hear? My microphone's off.
I can answer that.
Yeah, I knew somebody in the room would have that answer.
Ben Buchanan, who is a CPA here in the area, he is a direct descendant of the king from which Kingsport gets its name. Okay, talking to him, and my dad worked in Mason Dixon, he was the first purchasing agent, that yes, most people don't go back any further than their great-grandfather. We go back as far as we go. And yes, and if you look at Mr. King, E. Ward, E. William, and Mr. Buchanan, you'll notice a lot of the Kings had very thick glasses. And you look at the early picture of Reverend James King, and you'll see the same thing. There's an eye situation, and it can simply be solved by DNA. If one of the King, Mason Dixon, has their DNA haplogroup, Ben Buchanan, and you'll see, yes, they are related. Way back.
But they are. Thank you for adding it to it. And I'll take my name. Venable is not a very common name in this area, but in Charlottesville and that climb, Abraham Venable had 7 sons, and we all come from that, so I got cousins everywhere. And it's like the King family. You go back.
I'm one of your cousins.
You go back far enough, you're all related. I'm a
Question.
cousin.
Question over here,
So, other questions?
right here.
There, John. Seems like I can turn that microphone on and off, manipulate it.
I see on the map, on the early map that you have Newmarket, Virginia. Was that one of the earlier terminals? Growing up in the Shenandoah Valley, I went through Newmarket many times. In fact, I spent my honeymoon night there in Newmarket, and probably accepted that the Mason Dixon was there, and every time I passed it. Is that
That's true.
that's correct?
That was a relay point
A relay.
Back then, we didn't have the interstate highways we have today. They traveled 11 days. That Newmarket was as far as we could get on one dispatch. So the driver drove there and went to bed, and somebody else took it on to York, and then somebody else took it on to New York. So you're exactly right. I had a friend's dad who worked for Mason Dixon. Well, everybody's gone, I can tell it. But he was in supervision of Mason Dixon, and he lived in Gate City, and his daughter was a great friend of mine. And I was at his house one day, and I looked over, and there was this big steel ball laying over the corner. I said, "Where'd that come from?" He said, "That house we bought in Newmarket, the fields were full of little balls. They were cannonballs from the Civil War." But Newmarket was a relay. You know, the interstate commerce, the interstate highway system, which was established by President Eisenhower in the mid-50s, and he had to call it the National Defense Highway to get Congress to build it. They would never have built the interstate system we have today just for commerce. So he called it the National Defense Highway Act. And all the bridges had to be at least 13 foot 8 inches high so we could get our ballistic missiles under them. And that was a route. He was building that for commerce for the United States, and this country has been built because of that road system. In my opinion, I'm telling you, some are related, some truth, and I'm making some of it up. Any other questions? Well, Ken, I made it through it. I appreciate the opportunity. The things sitting back there on those tables, I hadn't seen in over 40 years. I packed my box in my office in Mason-Dixon in July of 1984. And it survived one move. But I told Phyllis I was doing this, and she said, "There may be something in the basement." And she went down and she said, "It could be that box that says Mason-Dixon." So I discovered all that. It's the first time I've seen it in 40 years. And I've had a ball going through the old newspapers and everything else. So again, thank you for inviting me here so I could do that. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Richard. You're one of the few people left, I think, who could give a first-hand impression of a major contributor to Kingsport's success. You know, Eastman was your biggest customer for many, many years, particularly in the tank line business. Eastman and the tank truck business kind of grew up together. In any event, Richard came a long way from Scott County, Virginia, to being the fellow who did the pricing for Mason-Dixon and for the customers that Mason-Dixon had, which is a pretty remarkable curve there. So, thank you for sharing your memories with us and the history of the company. And he made a long step forward. Let me give you an example of how there are big steps and there are little steps. I was hired to keep the parts records for the maintenance department. My desk, nobody ever called it an office, my desk was essentially precisely on the site of the Food City restrooms now. Back to Eastman Road. And I never got very far beyond that, but I worked for Frankie and Joe Harvey. Anybody here ever view either one of them? They were the maintenance people for Mason-Dixon in the 50s. I had a card file, and somebody would come in and say, "Well, we put a fifth wheel on such and such a trailer, or we put headlights on such a tractor," and so forth. So I had a card, and I'd record that, and then we'd go back in order where we needed to fill those back up. So one of those fellows was looking at my records one day, and we had things like the checkout station, like the general office, like the freight dock, the warehouse, the maintenance building itself. And he slipped through them and he says, "Wirehouse, you ever hear of a wirehouse?" Well, I was just taking the things that came to me, putting them on the record, I made a new file. Well, that was a fellow who didn't go any further than I did, who thought
warehouse was filled with wire. I can still remember how upset he was that I had made a category like that. Anyway, it's always fun to look back if you've been around long enough where you can look back, and most of us have now. And that's the objective of the Kingsport Historical Society, is to look back and to accumulate the records that go with looking back. And one of the other aspects of Mason-Dixon, which we didn't touch on, and the reason is twofold. One is there's very little information on it, and two is almost nobody remembers it. But Ward King had an airline. He had Southeast Airlines. And believe it or not, they flew to every town in Tennessee that had more than 30,000 population. They had like 11 or 12 destinations and origins in Tennessee. And I was, my first airplane trip, I was in the National Guard, and Ward King had a plane, DC-3, that took 25 of us in the National Guard over to Bowling Grey Hospital in Winston-Salem to give blood for someone who was having an operation and who needed blood. And so we flew over there, we went downtown to the hospital, got the blood delivered, got back on the plane, came back to Kingsport. But Southeast Airlines was a major undertaking that lasted for a number of years before the situation caught up with it. Anyway, remember, next month is the Archives Fall book report, and that will be Jeff Fleming dealing with housing developments in Kingsport. So hope you'll all keep that in mind and make arrangements to be there on the 10th of October, 5:30 in the City Hall. Yes, sir.
Just wanted to mention again, the Kings were very generous people, and as took care of your education with my dad, Mr. King gave the most generous gift ever to me, to my family. When I graduated from seminary, he took his private jet, took my parents who couldn't make the trip, and my dad's secretary for many years, Audrey Overby, and flew them. You can figure out how many thousands of dollars to fly to Richmond for my graduation and back. So the Kings are great contributors in private ways that many people will never know. And just getting my dad started, he started driving a truck, wrecked it, thought he was gone. Mr. King liked him, put him in charge of organizing the parks department, and he moved on up. And the same thing, paid for some education down in Dalton, Georgia, so he could become the first official purchasing agent. So I owe a lot to the Kings, King College, same deal, Kingsport, and even found my own DNA. I'm related to Thomas King, who may be related to those Kings as well. So, check your history.
Thank you.
And he gave that
He was talking about the generosity of the King family. When my father died in 1946, I still got the letter from Mason-Dixon. They were going to continue paying my mother the salary that my father made. Now, how long that lasted, I don't know, but that helped me too.
He gave that DC-3 to you too. The last DC-3 from Southeastern Airlines. He donated to the University of Tennessee.
Well, I was looking at a little bit of history of Southeast Airlines the last week or so. They started off with DC-3s, and then they got conveyors, which were the level, you know, DC-3 was a tail dragger. A conveyor was a tricycle landing. It was level, and which was a much improved airplane from a DC-3. So, it was a progressive situation, but can you believe flying from Dyersburg to Murfreesboro, for example, with probably 1 or 2 stops because they never got the wheels up. Anyway, any other comments? If not, thank you for being here. Look forward to seeing all your smiling faces next week or next month in October.